Good afternoon, and welcome back to another edition of Created Economy. If you're expecting some nice little dancing music, sorry to disappoint you. That unfortunately is not going to happen because usually Greg is the one with that, presses all the buttons, and I'm just the one that sits around and joins later on. But unfortunately, Greg will not be joining us today for this edition due to a little personal matter he has to attend to. But he will be back later for other episodes. But anyways, welcome to the Creator Economy, a weekly interview series where we chat with the players from the creator economy at large and discuss the key topics impacting the growth of the industry. So, let me bring this up and give you a little tutorial here. So, it's February 16th, 2022. This is episode 34 of the Created Economy. We air three shows as part of this series. Tuesdays is our Created Works, where Greg and some of his friends talk about the Web3 and everything else corresponding and actually building NFTs in real time. Then we have Wednesdays at 2 p.m., which is Created Economy, which is our weekly interview series, as I mentioned earlier. And then we culminate on Fridays at 8 a.m. with Created Briefs. It's our news show, which I think this week we will go exclusively on Twitter Spaces. So that's going to be all audio. So be sure to check all of that out every day or on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Fridays of every week. You can check out more of our long form content and show notes over at createdeconomy.com. We also are curating the news around the creator economy on Flipboard at flipboard.com/@createdeconomy. And be sure to follow us everywhere on social at Created Economy. Be sure to like and subscribe on our YouTube for all the latest videos from the show, all the latest news and insights on our Twitter account at Created Economy, and as also on Twitch when in the rare occasion that we actually syndicate to it. And without further ado, this week's guest is our very dear friend, Chris Heuer. Some of you may know Chris from as being the co-founder of the Social Media Club, uh, this wonderful global organization that kind of really has been at the forefront of Web 2 and everything that's happening with Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and the like, and very eager to hear more about his insights about where things have been going, especially in the creator economy, as well as what he's working on now with Web 3.1. I know you kind of think that, wait, what is Web 3.1? We're been talking about Web 3, and yeah, that seems pretty, like confusing. So we're just going to talk about it and see why are we, versioning up with Web3 right now. Like, can't we just stick with Web3 and just, see where that goes? What's the importance of updating a technology already that really hasn't hit mainstream adoption? And so without further ado, why don't we bring our dear friend? Well, Chris, how's it going?
All right, my friend. All right, my friend. I'm confused though right now. I don't understand this.
What are you confused about? You're the one that
Oh, everything.
well, I
So
mean,
overwhelming.
well, that's true because I mean, let's talk about this. You've been around the block for quite some time, way
Well, that's a very
before.
polite way to say I'm over 50, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, we weren't going to go like age shaming here, but no, but
Okay.
I think when I first moved to San Francisco in 2008, you were one of the first people I met, and your insights, as well as your wife Chrissy, have helped guide my understanding in terms of what's happening with social media with Web 2.0. Right? I think at the time
Thank
when
you.
when the internet came out, we're talking about, hey, this is all websites and emails and online advertising and banners, and that was pretty much the extent of like, oh, this is cool. And then there's this Cambrian explosion of technology with everything being very interactive and creator focused. And then you started seeing apps and all sorts of different things coming out, SaaS, and an emergence of this renaissance of tech. And it was like hard to really grok like what the hell is going on, and especially how do people interact with this to kind of build this community. And that's where Social Media Club came to be, right? So
Yes.
I guess the first let's I mean, we've got a long way to lot of things to talk about, especially to get to 3.1. But before we get to that, why don't we introduce yourself to people who are watching or listening, and how did you get into technology, and what made you co-found the Social Media Club?
Oof. Man, that's a lot. And you said like 30 things I want to reply to too. So I'm just going to make a quick note to myself here to come back to one of them in particular. Actually, before I do that, I'll knock one of them out. Didn't we meet in DC in 2007 or something like
You
that?
know, it
Right?
might have. I think it might have been like a ship's passing in a night. It might have been
Okay.
at an event that I was probably very early in my career in terms of networking and figuring out what the hell this web stuff
Yeah,
was.
I actually thought we met at that Fleischman Hillard thing that I did with them, where they put together a bloggers conference where you and Jeff
Yeah.
was there as well. But anyways, it's been great to have your friendship, support, and to work with you over all these years, and great to be talking here today. So yeah, so what we're doing really is getting the band back together, and the same things that inspired us to put together at the time Web 2.1, which we called Brain Jams, and eventually that really became Unconference. And I was very fortunate to attend the first bar camp and saw what was happening there. And I said, you know what, we need to expand this conversation. We need to bring in more people. We need to bring in more of the users, really. So in many ways, I was looking at it as a web user group across all technologies, inspired by what one of our friends and ultimately co-founders, Howard Greenstein, did with the WAC list in New York in the mid 90s, which was the World Wide Web Artist Consortium. And as you coming into San Francisco 2008, I hope to provide that similar experience for hundreds and thousands of more people by providing them a welcoming space to figure out how to get into this, how to actually use the technology, not just in speculative ways in the hopes of getting rich or whatever other things people might be doing, but in ways for actually changing the nature of our socioeconomic foundations, how we interact with one another, how we create value together. And then more importantly, as a couple of my colleagues and I were able to work through the other day, and much credit to Michael Moon and Stephen Gans in particular for this, as we started framing Web3 and looking at it more, what we recognized was that, we've got a kind of a minor shift evolution here. And it's greater than just a version number. And of course, part of 3.1 is meant to be a little cheeky or, irreverent about the fact of versioning the web. What it really is, of course, just a kind of slogan, a mantra, if you will, a symbol for people to get around. And we can't underestimate the importance of that. As social media became the kind of main symbol more so than Web 2 over the years, something else will emerge over Web 3 and Web 3.1, and that'll happen.
So
anyways, I'm getting off track here a little bit. Go ahead, bring me back, or I'll finish what I was going to do.
Well, I mean, this is, and for those that are listening, since Chris and I have been dear friends for quite some time, this is usually the kind of bantering that we do, where, and Chris is very idealistic in a rightful manner, because he holds a lot of promise, and from my conversation with him, it holds a lot of promise in terms of technology. So, it's like ping pong balls, everything going pew pew pew, and you're like, okay, let's
so
gather
much to
those
talk
blocks,
about.
because there's so much. Exactly, Chris. So, I mean, how did you get into technology? Let's start with that, right? And then how did you moved away from Social Media Club? And so let's start with the starting point.
Oh no, you're getting it scrambled. Let's start at the start. And oh my God, that was a weird laugh. I don't think I've ever laughed like that before. Anyways, you're special, Ken. Thank you very much. You inspire me to a great emotional expression. Where did I get into tech? I don't know. Actually, I'll tell you where. It's a really kind of weird story. But my mom divorced my what do you call it? Natural birth father when I was only a couple months old. She ended up getting remarried for a brief while to this gentleman, Frank, who was an engineer, and he would bring over Radio Shack kits and stuff like that. And to be honest, he smoked a lot and he smelled bad of smoke. And I ended up, he was a good guy and nothing wrong with him at all. But I just, as a kid, it was like tough to be around with that strong smell. But anyways, that kind of got me into it. And then in, sixth grade, I started getting exposure through this gifted program to computer games and more than that. And then ultimately, I got to take computer programming courses in seventh grade at Miami-Dade Community College. So I was able to actually, when I went in there at 13 or something like that, I was basically tutoring the other 30-year-olds, and I had just been learning it as I went. So I was just very fortunate. My brain is kind of wired that way. And as I like to say, not just about technology, software, stereo systems, a lot of web configuration is really following similar patterns to configuring your stereo or your home theater system. But from that, I was tutoring these old guys, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And so I ended up continuing down that path. But I ended up not getting a computer science degree. My ADD and all the rest of the stuff, I just made too many syntax errors. But with pattern recognition and a bunch of other kind of native talents, and being crazy too, I guess, as long as I'm doing that motion, right? I was able to actually do things like when we deployed first email customer support auto responder for the United States Mint, the federal government, Department of the Treasury, U.S. Mint, where I launched their e-commerce stuff. I remember one day I was going in, they were trying to figure out how to debug some code. And I just looked at the screen for a couple of seconds and I was like, oh, it's there. And they had been looking for the bug for like, an hour or something, right? So some of it's just God blessed that I was given some of these talents. And then it was really my grandmother, I was very fortunate. And, I know I'm privileged in so many ways. One of my businesses failed. And I went completely broke and had no money, had no food. My car was broken down, everything else. And I ended up moving back in with my grandfather, right? That's what privilege is, being able to have that sort of safety net and the ability to keep eating and keep trying and survive. But anyways, so that really led me into all of it. When I got into college, I used it. I was in the Mac labs regularly. But then in the mid 90s, when the internet came around, I was selling advertising at the weekly alternative newspaper, the Miami New Times. And an ISP came in to advertise with me. And so I'm like, oh, what's this internet thing? And, that was 94. And since then, it's been tech all the time.
So so you've gone from being basically a serial entrepreneur / consultant, right?
Yep.
You've not necessarily created like a traditional startup, like a Facebook or a Zealous or anything like that, but you've created consultancies to help
Kind of,
guide
yeah.
founders and a lot of tech personalities, if you will, a lot of the movers and shakers in the industry to kind of help them understand what the hell is going on, especially in the business side of things, right? So we could look to like Social Media Club, to Ad Hognium, to Remotely, to a
Mentor Bureau.
Venture
Yeah.
Bureau, a lot of these things. So overall, like, what is your philosophy in terms of technology, right? Because how do you
Mm.
view the overall landscape? Because I mean, let's talk about all the different. I mean, we could talk about all the different consultancies you've done, right? But they've
Mm-hmm.
all have this overarching belief in something around technology. What is it? I mean, because it's not like you're not pigeonholed to one
Well,
thing. You're
no.
not. It wasn't social
Well,
media.
and at the same time, I stayed out of the blockchain stuff because all these social media gurus flocked into crypto and became crypto gurus and experts, and f them. No, I don't mean that entirely, but there are a lot of people who rush into something and call themselves an expert because they looked at it for 2 days, and that's just not true. And that's what I'm more reacting to, as opposed to many of our really good friends who are doing great work in the space. And I don't mean to besmirch them in any way. But coming back to the core question, this is technology. Technology is a tool that allows us to do things. And that's actually gets into a little bit of why I initially was kind of pushing back on NFTs, realizing that there was no way to protect the rights inherent in them, realizing that people could create all sorts of crazy different terms on them, creating confusion in the market, seeing that so many people were already copying and faking stuff. I literally got in a Twitter conversation with Jeremiah Wang and Peter Shankman, which I said, oh, it's bullshit. It's art scams or whatever else. And I hadn't looked at it more closely. And then that conversation really led me to go, oh, there must be something really here that I'm missing, and to actually do my own research and see that it's more than that, and recognize that there is a greater promise to this technology in terms of what it can do as a tool to enable new kinds of behaviors. Let me go on one little other thread, and then please interject again. But coming back to the network agency concept, Ad Hocnium actually came from Barcamp, And what I had seen and what we learned from those early days with Web 2.1 as an unconference, and then Social Media Club beyond that, and the different unconferences that we put together, was that where the best energy, serendipity, excitement, and magic happened was when we had the right combination of unstructured and structured. How we brought people together, how we invited people into the conversation, how we hosted the space, how we greeted new people when they came into the space. Like when you flew out to San Francisco, when Chris Saad flew to San Francisco, and he was there actually, I think Saad's first day in San Francisco, or first couple of days, was at Web 2.2. Another version of that unconference we hosted. I don't know what year offhand, probably 2008 at that point, but who knows. Anyways, it's just been a very, very, I'm off track now because all of a sudden I was standing in the Microsoft conference room next to you, Greg, and Chris Saad. So I'm sorry about that. Help bring me back, please, Ken.
So I'm kind of curious, like, because you were talking about the, all the over things, because there's
the network agency
models,
yeah.
Agency, what you've done. Plus, I also want to mention that you work for Deloitte as well, right?
Well,
so
that's actually a good point to come back to that, because
like, what is that? How do you view technology itself? Because you mentioned it's a promise of the future, promise of changing. It's something that phrasing that you said is a promise of how it as technology being a tool to help change behavior, right? And is that something as you look at the broader landscape, not specifically around like, oh, what is social media or Web 2, or what is Web 3, but like you go back to when early days of the websites, right? Or email marketing, or artificial intelligence, or virtual reality. I mean, these are like, how do you view just the overall landscape? I mean, obviously there is skepticism, but how do you, like, what is the what is your overall impression of the technology landscape? Is it absolute garbage? Is it like doomed to fail?
No, so look, here's the thing. So I'm a believer in Jeffrey Moore's work on Crossing the Chasm. I think it really accurately reflects what I've seen in multiple technological revolutions over the years. One of the things, just it's a side point, and I will come back to this stuff about the overall impressions of technology and the broader philosophical issues on it. But we actually, when we did this Web 2.1 stuff and built Social Media Club was an idea of a borderless, decentralized, co-owned organization. And, as I started investigating in NFTs and understand their utility, and then NTTs and some of the other variants of this stuff, and then seeing where we were at, I realized that this was the moment to come in and help do sense making, and to start convening the people who cared about human-centric values as opposed to power-centric models. By that, I mean concentration of wealth, concentration of power, Putin, commanding and controlling the world through his actions and what he's doing now. Like the people who play for that game, as opposed to those who think about creating value. It's a different world. But what I've noticed is, and what happened with Social Media Club, was that we had shared values around sharing and helping one another. And so I'm looking to bring that into play here with Web 3.1, where we have some credibility because we've already done these things. But what it was at the time was a recognition of the connectivity, not just the technology itself, but what it provided, and the context that it put in the world for how we could interact with one another, that it created entirely new models for how we communicated. And what we did at the time to have these chapters in cities all over the world, ultimately 350 cities, not only couldn't have been done without the technologies and platforms like Twitter, and at the time we even were on Ning early. And anyways, a lot of other stuff. So these technologies enabled new ways of us to connect with one another. And I always screw up the quote, but what's his name? Antoine Saint Antoine du Exupéry, right? Nothing like the communications of the mails, of trains, and everything else has had a more prominent effect on humanity. And so as we're looking at that today and thinking about this technology and this next generation, Don Tapscott really had it right in his Blockchain Revolution book, talking about this being a way of communicating or transmitting value, not just information. But what it also does in our mind is it actually changes the way that we're looking at things, where for a long time now we've been talking about the sharing economy. But we believe it's actually moving now to the co-ownership economy. Now, the difference between co-ownership and sharing is title. But that's meaningful if we actually think that property can be owned by someone. People have right to property, which happened to be one of the few papers I remember writing in college, was a paper on the right to property. But as we look at this stuff, the point is that the technologies are all the tools that enable these new forms of behaviors. And we have done a lot of these things before. And as we look at Web3 in particular, and we start looking to the decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAOs, we've had co-ops and collectives and time banks for a long time, but our social consciousness wasn't ready to embrace this stuff. In fact, even bringing up the word social consciousness might indicate to some people socialism. And there's that whole other political connotation around that, which, we're not getting into here. It's about humanity and individuals. And yes, we have these models to describe it, but, let's set that aside and look at what it does. And the ability to give people actual real ownership. And when we get through the regulation and all the legal shit that's going to shake out around NFTs and DAOs and the rest of this stuff, and it'll probably take 3 to 7 years based on past experience, we'll have this place where it's just going to be enabled by the technology that you and I right now could decide that we're going to start a new business, and that we could go ahead and set it up, have all the legal financial stuff established within the course of 15 minutes. And you could be halfway around the world, and we're not dealing with local jurisdiction laws. We're not dealing with other stuff. We are able to own this, build a piece of code, build a e-commerce storefront, design T-shirts. And this is where it really gets to creative enterprises, because that unleashes the one thing that robots really can't and won't be able to do for some time, as we look at the evolving society as a result of this transformative technology, robotics, AI, and the rest of it. And it allows us to unleash our real greater potential as human beings. So all of this comes back to, again, I look at technology, and I shifted to this, going into college. I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to worry about how to actually make it do the code and make it do the work. I'm going to keep thinking about, what does it do for us as individuals? How does it help us create value? And now, how does it help us co-create value? And as you know, we are smarter than me. So, if you believe in that, you can see that the key thing to figure out, which has been a question I've been asking myself and others for 25 years now, is how do we get smart people to work well together? And if we can figure that out, anything's possible. And we've seen that again and again in teams of all sizes. That's why in Silicon Valley, teams will go from one company to the next, and whether it's 10 years later or 2 years later, wherever it is, teams that work well together stick together. And you're likely to actually see this on a regular basis if you're able to go out in your local community to restaurants. When there's a good, solid team working a restaurant and everyone's got their back, there's a different kind of energy. There's a different bond. There's a different type of value and experience created. So, by focusing on those things, that brings me to closing up on your network agency comment, because it was the work with Ad Hocnium, and my friendship and relationship with John Hagel, who's a terrific author, Power of Pull, a whole bunch of other stuff, Net Worth, Net Gain. He was able to introduce me, but the vice chairman of Deloitte US was interested because he wanted to explore how they might become a network agency of the future that was more elastic in terms of its cost, talent, and skills, and ability to deliver what it was that customers demanded today. So it's a more real-time sort of organization. And really, in that sense, the organization takes care of the financial, legal, reputational, and performance support processes. So as I'm looking at the DAO and what's ahead, One of the things that we're hoping to be able to get from this is to actually perform and put together, I'm sorry, I used the wrong word, to put together a Web3 sort of professional services guild, where people are going to be able to connect with each other, create their own guilds within it, inside the framework, and have shared values that serve purpose-built companies and creative enterprises like those in the creator and co-creator economy.
So what is this? I mean, we've seen probably, let's say,
I took you through 30 years, by the way, in those last
well,
6 minutes.
I'm going
So
to break down the 30 years before we dive into,
please, I'm sorry.
right? So, or we'll dive in before we dive into get into the next, 30 days rather.
Sure.
So there've been, let's say, three major, and my history is off, so I'm just going to stay with the
Yeah.
three major, uh, um, defining generations of tech in at least in our lifetime, right? Or at least in the past 40 years, right? You have web 1.0, as we talked about, websites and everything like that. Very static pages, email marketing, online advertising, Google and everything like that. Very one directional type of, output driven type of technology. At least on the web. Web 2.0, social media, very community oriented. Hey, let's gather together. Let's find people of like-minded interests or whatever, and be able to converse without having to pick up a phone or like do it in real life chatter. Um, and brands can now have a better interaction, real time interaction with their customers and their clients. Now you have Web 3, which is now, we went from individualism to we live in public to now, okay, now we want to own our data and be somewhat a little bit more private, right? Private
Mhm.
can be
Yep.
that
Well
broad
done.
definition of private, right? It can be do whatever we want. Like you own your data, you want to have some anonymity, or you just don't want someone to be able to see who, what you're doing. Right or wrong, that's the way the landscape is. Based on everything you've just talked about, Chris, in terms of bringing humanity back into this, three generations have come in, like 40 years. Why has this not been done yet? Why are we not talking about, like, has anyone been doing this? We
Oh,
don't see.
yes.
Oh,
Oh,
yes?
yes. And it has been all along, but what happens is, we get to 1999 and the irrational exuberance, and the pursuit of the money. And then you've got venture capital that's structured for 100x flips only, focused. One of the worst things is VC capital not letting people solve the big problem together, but instead funding those point solutions that only serve one part of the market. Anyways, there's a lot more to that as we go, but we certainly, I mean, you just talked about it, bringing people together, enabling people to express themselves. We were able to do that, by the way, in Web 1. We just had to do it with HTML and FTP and, Photoshop. And that was our toolkit, right? That's all we had. But again, what's different now is that we're having a similar sort of exuberance. There's a tulip mania, if you will, in some spaces. Some of it's actually warranted, which is hard. So I don't want to be I'm not a total naysayer. I mean, there's amazing projects that are going to fund people of color, fund communities, build startup ecosystems, and the DAO is becoming a vehicle for doing a lot of that. One of our speakers at Web 3.1 is actually doing a water DAO for the Bay Area, and some of the ideas for how they're actually incentivizing community engagement to improve their ability to actually, keep the waterways clean, but also to monitor them and really tap into sort of, the people who care about that and organizing them in an interesting way as a community organization. I mean, that is human centric, and there's a ton of that out there. But over the last couple of months in particular, as Bram Cohen was telling me the other day, we've got a number go up problem. You may have seen the line goes up or line go up video on YouTube and elsewhere. And it's this focus that we have in our innate human nature to look for spectacular success and terrible failure, and to cheer on one on the way up and another one on the way down, and do these things. And there's a lot of self-actualization that I've seen happening with the younger generation now that is starting to kind of reshape some elements of the atmosphere of the context in which we're operating here in the world. Um,
So
but
let's
go ahead, bring back. But one last thing, just let me summarize it. And I wrote about this actually on web31.substack.com. Too many people, and this is a natural thing in the beginning. I mean, obviously, we've known Robert and so many other people who are huge tech enthusiast, early adopters, pre-early adopters. Before it's even able to be adopted in the womb, they're using the technology and getting excited about it. But too many end up excited about the technology itself instead of about the people who they're doing it for. And one of my biggest mistakes as an entrepreneur over the years that I didn't realize until I started working as a lead mentor with Google and their Launchpad was that I would fall in love with my solutions instead of the problems. And by doing that, I became intransigent and fixed in like how cool this idea was that I shaped in my mind for how we were going to build the software. And as you know, with Aligned, I mean, we lost everything on that, $1 million practically, everything I had managed to save with Deloitte and elsewhere, because I wanted to build this thing that I wanted to show people. And I wasn't in love with the problem. I wasn't in love with helping the people. So that's a really specific way of talking about what I mean by connecting hearts and minds with and across Web3 to understand that that's really where we can create the most profit, where we can create the most impact, where we can actually create the most personal satisfaction, and where we can actually get the best teams built, because there is a shared passion and this vision for a better tomorrow. And when that becomes a part of the focus, it's beyond customer centric, right? It's mission centric, it's vision centric, it's purpose driven. And all of those terms now are becoming more in the forefront. So, by bringing that together with this Web3 technology, Web3 is still a little early. It's rough around the edges. It's hard to get into. There's a lot of other challenges, a lot of confusion, FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt. But now's the time to get some more of the more courageous community leaders and business people and average everyday citizens and journalists and, the people who are going to be affected by this to have their voices heard. And that's really kind of the big goal of this ultimately, is to bring those people together and to bring the leaders who actually embrace those purpose-driven organizations and do have human-centered values and heart-centered leadership, that we're able to bring those people together and support them to make that the dominant force in the world, instead of allowing spammers and scammers to basically reign over the day and the future.
So let's talk about the Web 3.1. I think we've kind of kind of really skirted the issue, skirted the main issue for quite some time here. But let's dive into that, right? Because now you are working on your next big project is, as you mentioned, Web 3.1. You've touched on what Web 3.1 is from a philosophical standpoint, but the main project the deliverable here, the product is an unconference. So
Correct.
those that are kind of like, I've heard the word before, but I like, is it a conference? Like, why are you throwing "un" in front of everything? Is it like one of those techniques? Do you have to apply an E or an I to everything? So is it now an E? What the hell is an unconference? And why should people care about attending this event? Like, what am I supposed to learn from this? Or what will I learn from this?
Thank you. So there's three questions in there, and I'll do the first one. The one is on. The second one is the event itself, and then the takeaways. So I'll just write that down so I can actually get through those properly. So the Unconference is something that actually rose out of bar camps, using what was bar camps emerged in 2005, in the summer of 2005, in Silicon Valley as a core element, really, in my view, to the Web 2.0 movement. And what I experienced there was competitors collaborating, people just jamming on ideas like jazz musicians, and sharing what it is that they were working on, sharing what they were passionate about, and connecting with each other And from that, companies were formed, relationships were formed, babies were made, all sorts of crazy things were happened. But it was about that coming together around a shared interest with shared values. But the core value of Web 2 at the time was participatory web, right? That we were all participants, that we all had responsibility for our own experience. And now if we go back a prior era, the whole Earth electronic catalog, otherwise known as the WELL in its more popular stuff, had very similar sorts of beliefs when we first started getting BBSs back in the, oh gosh, I want to say 70s. It might be 80s at that point. I've got to look at the history again. I forget the numbers. But the point being is that, again, we were actually coming together and responsible for ourselves. And one of the phrases out of the WELL was, you own your own words. And so, this idea of taking personal responsibility. With the open space, it is essentially an invitation to join in a conversation around a topic. In this case, human-centric web, Web 3, Web 3.1, what that means. Talk about what it is that we need, what problems are we trying to solve, share projects and solutions that might be a part of it. But we invite everyone in the morning and we build the agenda for that day together. So we're going to have multiple rooms throughout the day with different kind of tracks and focuses, if you will, foci, excuse me. And then, it's different time slots throughout the day. So individuals will be able to propose a topic, get a room, and invite other participants to join them to talk about and discuss that problem, a good solution, or a particular issue. So we're talking about things like rights management, of course, NFTs as access tokens, or as access keys, as some people like to talk about them even now. NFTs as access keys. I'm sure there's a song in that, Jonathan Mann, somewhere. But the idea ends up being that we're responsible for our own experience. We create it, we drive it. And so we're just really facilitating that space. And then when we look at that beyond that, what we hope people to take away is that they'll either find a project that they can support, that they will actually gather support for their projects, and that they will learn a little bit more about some of the issues that are affecting the development of Web 3, particularly around our theme and our focus, which is what will it take to deliver on the promise of Web 3, or the promises of Web 3. So over the course of the next week, you're going to see a bunch of videos from our speakers and others come out to address what they believe that promise is, why they're enthusiastic about it, and what they see as the key sort of innovation or stumbling block that might be preventing it from happening, and what we need to do in order to transcend that and really deliver on this for society. Now, just really quickly on it, and I'll wrap up on this part and get to the next question. The big promise, as many of you know who have been looking at this, is decentralization. Well, the big promise of Web 2.0 was democratization. Is there a lot of difference between the two? There's some, but what it means is putting power in the hands of people. And it's also being used more in a technical sense. And so at the end of the day, all the people that I know who I trust, who know this stuff inside and out, much smarter than me and much more well off than me, see that it's going to be some kind of hybrid model. It's not all going to be decentralized tech. There's certain reasons why it can't be, which we won't get into now. But then we're getting into some of the other issues, which is DeFi. And what does DeFi mean? A lot of DeFi has turned into refi lately, where it's actually a re-centralization of wealth in the hands of a few people. So some of that's even not being there. So there's some hypocrisy inside of it. There's also a certain level of toxicity and stagnation that's happened with some of the particularly big players out there. And so we really want to, bring back those people who have a more positive intention for it, to give a chance for them to come together and meet others of like mind who are kind of tired of the toxicity. And I'm sorry to say, but many of the crypto bros and their pump and dumps and, NFT spamming and all the other stuff that's going on out there, and focus again back on what it can do for us as humans, what it can do for us as communities, what it can do for us as a particular culture or a particular background, and how it can actually lift us all up. Because at the end of the day, the one thing that we really see out of this is an opportunity for us to co-elevate with other like-minded and people who have shared values, and to lift each other up. And as you know, we did Rising Tide a number of years ago as a small little community experiment for about a year. And this is, in that vein. So we want to get people who believe in mutuality, who believe in accountability, and who believe in sharing what they know to lift up others. And so, what I hope people will take away is not only some insights about Web3, about what's next, some colleagues to work with them on the journey of what it is that they're building. We've actually got 4 entrepreneurs who don't have tech teams yet, but have technologies, in one case, a patent that he's looking to build organization around. And he just wants to share the idea with people who are interested in it and see if they want to talk to him and work with him on it. So we're also looking at this as a source of many other community projects. And as we direct this, one of the other things we'll be doing is applying for a bunch of different community grants from different chains to be able to actually build some open source products, standards, and protocols.
So, I mean, what is based on what I'm gathering from everything that you said, you're the Unconference is more of more like an advocacy play, right? In terms of, I think for when people that might hear like Web 3.1, they're thinking, okay, it's this new era, another whole new era of tech. Like, wait, it's like saying, hey, here's 6G. Like, wait, hold on, we're not even we haven't totally figured out what the hell 5G can do. And
Well, but meanwhile, people are already working on 6G. So it
right,
might not be a thing, but people are working on it.
right.
So this is in that same vein that and there's a lot of people right now who actually say Web3 is already over before it started. So I'm not trying to get into that debate, but the point being is that it is a symbol to represent what's next and what's beyond what is and what is emerging.
Right.
To get past the limiting beliefs of that what is today is all that will be. And so part of it is actually a neuroscience device to get people to let go of those limiting beliefs of what other people are calling it, so that we can actually help to define what it should be.
Right. So you're not suggesting like a fundamental shift. Like, I think you're trying to get in on the ground floor of Web3 early, so to speak. Because Web3 is still very much in
Very
its
early. Yeah,
infancy.
yeah. And
Yes,
again, not ready for prime time, by the way. Let's
right,
just be clear.
right.
Totally not ready for prime time.
And as you said, there's a bunch of scams at play here. There's a lot of potential good that can be done with Web3.
And a
Uh,
bunch of great people.
yeah, I don't think that blockchain technology is 100% like malicious. It's there's obviously good stuff it can do to improve the state of the world and technology and make things fun and exciting. But I think to before we get to that, before it goes full bore, I think obviously that the philosophy that you have, the principle behind Web 3.1, this unconference, is an interesting one, because it's like, hey, let's re let's remind people of the focus of what innovation should be, and of that
Mm-hmm.
innovation being to bring everybody along and to change the world and to better society. And having this be as a reminder is a good thing. I think the well, it's easy to be tripped up on the fact that, like, wait, anyone who's been in tech, when you see versioning, you're like, oh, okay, wait, there's something new. It's like, wait, now we're dealing with iOS 17. Like, hold on, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, I haven't downloaded this from my iPhone yet, or I
Well,
have.
well, to that point though, as Michael reminds me regularly, the world really changed with Windows 3.1.
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
was the one. That was the first real GUI,
yeah.
graphical user interface that transcended it. So there is some actual historical connectivity. Not that I want to be connected with anything that touches the blue screen of death, but that was a big moment. And then coming back to your earlier comments about when social media and the rest of it hit, we've really looked at it and identified that the iPhone was the moment
Mhm.
that changed everything with that, right? To be able to have that kind of power and that kind of smartphone and that form factor and that accessibility, that was the thing that changed it, really.
So somebody, as somebody that's been around creators for an equal amount of time and communities, how do you what is that defining thing in terms, or how should they view Web 3.1 in terms of their adoption of NFTs, DAOs, blockchain, crypto, all these other things, as they kind of start to peel away a little bit from traditional social media? Like, I mean, obviously,
Well, one of the things this generation has really hit upon, and they've understood it, and I don't know it's been related in this way because again, it's not necessarily in the most positive reference model or story to reference, but you look at like the meme stomps and what happened when people were able to organize together in terms of, making a difference in reshaping financials on companies and making, millionaires and billionaires. And of course, if you look into any, emergent NFT community, or DAO in particular, a couple of them that come to mind right now, there's a lot of activity that is all about the hype man or hype woman trying to get people excited and go off and promote it and do all this other stuff and, get more hyperbole and the rest of it. And, there's a role for that, I guess. Um, I'm sorry, I get distracted by that because it really just bums me out because there is this ability to really create value. And so for those people who are actually focused on creating value and experience, and it's more than just an image, but it represents something more meaningful. It provides access to a community. One of the things we're looking at for the Web 3.1 DAO is selling essentially a token that is your annual pass to all of our ongoing education. Right. And so there's a lot of things that can be done like that, but it starts with that we want to educate people. It doesn't start with that, oh, I can make a lot of money by selling these things that are, digital files.
yeah. So let's dive a little bit more about how this is almost like a unique conference, right? Well, it's it's tailored for the Web 3. It's built around Web 3, rightfully so. But I think it's different from the mainstream conferences that I guess the status quo conferences that we've come
Well,
to.
we are also hosting a leadership summit the day before with a lot of headaches and
Right.
programming and scheduling and speakers and all that.
Well, let's
Because
talk about those two for
yeah,
two different, because they're two different. They're
sure,
same event, same conference, two different events. What is
yes.
the difference between the unconference? Because you've already defined what the unconference is, what an unconference is in general. What am I going to get from that versus going to the leadership summit? Because the unconference is free, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, well, it's free because we want to make sure that it doesn't exclude anyone, that
Mhm.
everyone has an opportunity to come participate and learn. But it's not free to produce.
Right.
The actual per head cost is somewhere around $5 to $8 per person, and so we're expecting a few hundred people. So we have to offset those costs some way with sponsorships and ticket sales. But what we also wanted to do was provide an ability for the leaders of these enterprises and these organizations and people who are professionally endeavoring to create something, commercially viable, to be able to come together and connect with one another. So we've created, a full day of programming. Other than a couple of keynotes, there's 3 tracks going on all day. And so there's about 30 or 40 different speakers who we've tapped into with pre-programmed content with specific educational objectives, like around how to manage community-driven organizations. What does the governance need to look like? How do we create a culture that induces ongoing engagement? How do we overcome the tragedy of the commons to sustain communities? As well as getting into some of the aspects about digital rights and some of the legal components. And then again, addressing, these issue of DAOs and some different DAOs as examples of the sort of community impact. So what we found in that early work where we started looking at structured and unstructured was that depending on the invite, you would get a different type of person. And what we found was that business users, so to speak, if you will, the suits and the sweatshirts is one that we've used over the years. You may remember John Beeler and I did the talk. It was his talk idea. He invited me in on. I was very grateful for that. On do the cool kids leave when the suits arrive? Which was a great session on that deals with this sort of issue. But
There's
what we
nothing
found
wrong with
is
wearing
that,
suits. There's
yes,
nothing wrong with wearing suits. We should say that.
nothing at all, or sweaters or polos or loud shirts. But what we found was that they would only come if they knew what they were getting.
Mhm.
And with the unconference, you don't necessarily know what you're getting. You have to buy into the space and the invite and showing up and doing the work. But if you do that and you invest the time, what might come is unfathomable.
Right.
Like, and you've seen this, you've come out of events that we've produced that where it's like you met somebody or, new gigs or whatever it might be, new clients, and some great photos that you've taken over the years out of all of those as well, of course. That who knows what some of those photos lead to, right? So you just don't know.
Yeah.
And so to fill both of those needs, to try to make sure that we can bring both sides of that sort of mindset together, that's where we do the hybrid sort of event. And then
And
also, just to be clear on this and to give props out, I was very fortunate to be involved and go to the Internet Identity Workshop that Doc Searles and so many people put together over the years. And they did a similar sort of thing where they set it up with a bunch of speakers on the first day, and then they moved into this sort of open space unconference to allow for greater conversations and engagement. And it is in very many ways, I guess, a little reverse classroomy, right? Where you watch the presentation or you watch the video, and then you get together later and you talk about it, and you actually discuss it, and you put that insights and knowledge into action and try to figure out what to do with it. So it covers both sides of that as well. And I mean, we could have just called it the conference, but I really wanted to emphasize the unconference, and I also really wanted to emphasize the inclusionary or the inclusive part of it, because that really underlies a big part of our ethics and values here as well. That what this technology does for us is creates and enables a more inclusive economy.
Mhm.
And that is, broader than the DEI sort of terms that we're talking about, that deals with the unbanked, that deals with, food poor, financial poor, third world. And I know poverty, I'm probably using wrong language. Apologies on that. But the point is that we're able to actually create a space that's fair and includes the opportunities for everyone to participate. So we really want to embody that. And that's the other reason why, we're running this event as if it was co-owned, even though we don't have it all set up like that, where we're sharing a percent of the profits with the speakers, we're sharing a percent of the profit with the volunteers, and we're treating it as a real co-creation. And that in itself is an experiment. Like, I want to see like what that does and how does that change and shape community engagement when community members are being rewarded for the value they create.
and it
And
should be
as you, yeah,
worth
go
noting
ahead.
that the Web 3.1 conference is a virtual conference,
Yes,
obviously
it's all online. Yeah.
pandemic. So this is anyone can join,
Yep.
no matter where you are, although time zones may make it a little difficult.
Yeah. West
So
Coast centric. Yeah.
right. So for those that are unable to join virtually, like live, are they these sessions and this everything that's happened at the unconference and the leadership summit, will they be available after the fact for
Yes.
people to look for posterity purposes, or for, hey, this is something I really wanted to watch. I missed that talk. I want to know more about what's happening with X, Y, and Z. Is that all going to be? Will that live on in perpetuity?
So, yes, and what we're doing is we're actually selling a video on demand pass to the library of all the sessions, especially given the fact that we're probably going to end up losing money on this as our first event. And we'd like to at least not lose money. That would be really nice. That might change. We've got a couple of sponsors we're talking to now who want to come in and figure out how. And, ticket sales are really just now getting underway because we're going to release the actual final schedule on Friday. And then once people see the quality of the people and the topics and what we're doing is when we expect to, really start promoting it, because then we've got transparency into what's going on and they can trust what's going on, right?
What do you want to get? What would you say that would define this event as being a success? Because this is obviously the first year, and we all know how first year events can go, especially conferences.
Yeah,
But it's like, but this is a big undertaking for various reasons, not just because it's an event, right? Because it could potentially shape a new era of technology, right? Or an
that's the
emerging
idea.
technology. When you look back at this, say a year from now, and we're like, "Hey, are you gonna do a Web 3.1 conference in 2023?" Like, what would you say, would help answer that question? Like, you look back, this is
Well, there you go. There's the success. I mean, it does it. So again, so my definition of success for Social Media Club, I had bodacious, uh, big, audacious, hairy goals. Some of which were actually realized, and many of which weren't. You asked me at the beginning why I got involved with Web 3.1, and I expressed again that comes back to the same reason why we did Web 2.1. And that's because I'm concerned about our species. I'm concerned about the continuation of humanity. And back then, my hope was in our idealist mind that the technology would enable us to see each other and find our common humanity instead of focusing on the differences. Obviously, I was misdirected and wrong on a lot of that on many levels, but it still happened. It just wasn't the predominant story. And because the 10% or whatever number of society that's really instigators and, having troubles and doesn't want to get along and all the rest of that creates a different dynamic. And of course, it's that squeaky wheel thing. So we see more of the shitty stuff than we do the great stuff that happens every day inside small communities, in small towns connecting with other small towns across the world. But the predominance of that experience is positive, despite the recent decline in public discourse resulting from our uncivil war. But now I'm off the question again. I'm sorry, because I went back to this
like,
stuff.
what is your definition of
Yeah.
success? At the end of because you
Well,
met
it's about survival of the species. It
yeah.
really is. And what it is it's about making this the predominant conversation. And this, of course, as you know, from dealing with me over many years, it's an ambiguous thing. I see things and I'm not always the best at communicating them. There's times where I am in zone and it's just coming out of my heart and I don't even know what I'm saying necessarily. Not that I'm speaking in tongues or anything, but just it's flowing from who I am because this, of my experience growing up and everything that I've had and what I've found and the people who have touched my life and in the different ways and my desire to show, that we're all imperfect humans and I'm the most perfect example of an imperfect human. But that we control our destinies and our circumstances. That, like myself, a kid who grew up in the Midwest to a disabled mother growing up with a grandparent and eating government cheese. Not that, it was a good middle class thing. I'm not saying, we were dirt poor or anything like that. I got a college education, very privileged in many ways. But that regardless of those circumstances, that we can take charge of our own lives and we can create the sort of future we want. And what I see now is that if we don't get together and do that now, we're not going to have another chance to do this. I had really hoped social media would be the catalyst to reshape society. And in many ways it was. And in fact, maybe we needed to go through some of those pains in order to make the realizations, like they say about getting involved in politics, that we have to be engaged in there. But this is, another arena in which more people need to be engaged and understand, and in which we need to create an understanding of each other, mutual respect. And it starts by, finding the tribes and the groups of people and the communities with which you can do that. And so what would be successful is that if people, whatever name it comes up to, or if it changes names or whatever it might be, however this evolves, is for people, 10 years, 15 years hence, like yourself, to say, I met Chris and I went through this thing and like, wow, that's such a great group of people there. And like, it really affected my career. And I was able to make contributions here. And, maybe I met a spouse or a partner or whatever that might be. Created a new business, created income, found my way. I can hardly take credit for it, but of course, our dear friend Mark Horvath with Invisible People still credits going to Social Media Club LA with one of the key moments for helping him break out and learning how to get his story of the homeless people in LA and around the world to get better coverage, to get better support, and to make the sort of impact he does by walking around the street handing out socks, right? And so what would be successful is in a few years from now, hearing more of those stories. The numbers, they'll be whatever they are. The number go up thing, that's great, and it is a representative of the significance and the energy within a movement, just as it is in a video game or a bank account, or in an NFT price, I guess. But what's really matter is that we're able to touch and affect people's lives, and if we're doing it there, we know that there's a scale beyond that we'll never see.
So we're running short on time. So quick
Yep.
10-second answer here. Who should attend this the Web 3.1 unconference?
Well, definitely, we definitely want creators. We want to talk about the co-creator economy, as I mentioned, and what it means to do that, and some of the new mechanisms. Jennifer Navarrete is going to be speaking about the new podcast standards that allows for revenue splits on podcast streams and recorded podcasts. If you're involved and interested in figuring out what a DAO is, how you might use that, if you're actually already involved in one, we'd love for you to come and share what it is that you know. So anyone who's in the Web3 space or leading, we have, like one of the founders of Coco NFT, he's going to be talking about his journey from the startup hackathon into actually running this business and doing this now NFT marketplace that lets you turn your Instagrams into NFTs and offer them for sale. So it's really just, if you have an interest around this, or if any of the stuff that we've been talking about around society, around economic inclusivity, around this sort of emergent technology, is important to you. And if you are concerned about the direction that a lot of it's heading, even more reason for you to come and join and support us if you can.
Cool. And so a little bit of disclosure, I should probably put that at the beginning. But Greg and I will be actually speaking at the Web 3.1 unconference. And we have this nice little discount code for you. So in case you want to attend, I believe this is a discount for the Leadership Summit. If you
Correct.
go to bit.ly/web31 MAR22 and use the code Young, YEUNG, you'll get some some discount on
About 35%. So yeah, the cost of the Leadership Summit is $310, and then with the discount code, it goes down to $200, and that basically accounts for like 30 different unconference attendees as well. Cool. If you want to think of it as the scholarship price.
Well, yeah, and then if you want more information about the Web 3.1 conference or to register, you can obviously use that bit.ly code, or you can go to web31.xyz. A lot of great speakers lined up for them, including our very dear friend Brian Solis, and a bunch of others. But thank you, Chris. Thank you for your insights and sharing with us sharing with me about the Web 3.1, what you're doing. Always great to chat with you and catch up. I know we actually talking about this early during our holiday party, and then you're in and out, like, because you're like, hey, I was just here for a hot second and I had to leave, and then like, okay, I wanted to know more about what was going on. Yeah. So it's great that we got you on the show to talk about this. And then good luck with everything, and we will see you in a couple of weeks at the Web 3.1.
Yeah, it's under 2 weeks already. So
yeah.
And if you're out there, I'm going to be at ETH Denver starting tomorrow. So look for me somewhere around the event, and hope to meet up with more people.
Cool. Well, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it, and chat with you again later.
Thank you so much, Ken. Really appreciate you sharing with your community.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for joining us. A little bit of housekeeping before we wrap up. Stay tuned. Come watch us again next week, and we actually have more amazing guests lined up for right through March. Actually, next week is Sammy Kaufman. She is in charge. She works at Linktree, amazing company that kind of been out there talking about link and bio stuff. But she runs Linktree's music side, so great insights to share. Obviously, and then following up, beginning of March, we have Will Bauman. He's the co-founder for Fourth Wall, that is specializing in helping creators establish their online presence on the web off traditional social media platforms. So if you want to be a guest, we still have opportunities in April and later in 2022. Feel free to register at createdeconomies.com/guest list. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And we will catch you on Friday for Created Briefs. And then we're back next week with another edition of Created Works, Created Economy, and then also Created Briefs. Chat with you later. Bye.